Hello and welcome to Bounce Around Charleston. We're so excited being here today. And lawyer John Price is back here with us today to tell us more about personal injuries and what you need to know when getting involved in an accident. Mr. Price, welcome back to Bounce Around Charleston.
Thank you, Reverend. It's good to be back. And hello to everybody out there and bounce around land out there.
Happy New Year to you, sir. Happy New Year.
And the same to you and your family and all the viewers.
Okay. Mr. Price, an accident happens and people, the first thing they do is jump out their car and just start talking. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Am I right?
Well, I don't know exactly how many accidents they immediately jump out of the car. Sometimes people have a really big shot of adrenaline that hits them when an accident occurs. And for the first, as I've heard many clients testify in depositions, it's almost like the first few minutes, they really kind of don't know what's going on. They're shaken up or they're riled up or they're excited or they're distressed. I've heard him put it so many ways over the years. But it is good, I think, to try and gather yourself as best you can under the circumstances when you're in the car after the accident has happened. Just take a second to make sure that you are, in fact, okay before you start, flailing about or jumping about or getting overly excited. But, we have to accept a lot of times we have to accept the way things are under the time and circumstances that we're under at that moment. And it just seems like people do have many people can have a higher degree of excitability. Of course, it varies with the severity of the injury that is felt at the moment. And you have to remember that very often severe injuries, if any, may not come about for another 48 to 72 hours or even longer. It's what they call a delayed onset of symptomatology, which is very common. Doctors and nurses see it all the time. So, you never quite know how you're going to react, and it's hard to say how you're going to react. But just do the best you can under the circumstance and try to maintain composure and communication with anyone that's necessary.
And don't be answering questions.
Well, it's not a criminal interrogation, hopefully it's not. Hopefully somebody's not driving around with something in that car you're not supposed to have in it or what have you. But, generally speaking, you should be helpful as best you can to the investigating officer. There's nothing wrong with telling them what you experienced at the time of the accident, what you saw, what you heard, and how you saw it. The main thing is not to admit fault, not to say I'm at fault or it was my fault, because we don't know that until all the information is gathered. Now, granted, lots of times it's going to be a standard rear-end collision, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But the main thing is not to admit fault, because you really don't know whose fault it is. That's more of an opinion or an impression as opposed to a fact of what happened in the accident, such as I was waiting at a red light and this person came barreling through and hit me from behind, or this person came through the intersection just as I started on the green light and they ran the red light. Whatever it may be, you do want to cooperate with the investigating officer as well as you can, as reasonable under the circumstances.
And you should contact the police.
Certainly somebody should file a report at the very least. And of course, if somebody needs medical attention, then you should, contact medical attention, dial 911, but certainly you should report the incident to the police. It's never a good idea. It's very, very seldom a good idea to not call the police to the scene. If both parties do agree not to call the police because maybe the accident is viewed as minor or what have you, be sure that you exchange information. Make sure that you get the license tag and the make of the car. Make sure you get the driver's license. Now we have cell phones. It's easy to take photographs of those things, whereas back in the days we might would have written it down or something on a sheet of paper or a little notepad in the car. But now to make sure that you do exchange the information and make sure it's a mutual exchange.
Okay. So, and when the police officer comes and you're trying to describe the incident, what determines who's at fault?
Well, you got to remember that the police officer, when he fills out the accident report, very often he'll make a finding in his opinion at that time as who's at fault. But you must remember that the police officer was not a witness to the situation. The police officer is just simply giving his opinion, which again may or may not be proven or disproven at a later date. But just common violations of your driving manual, driving habit, driving customs, and certainly in violation of state statutes and the Motor Vehicle Act and so forth is going to be taken into consideration when a police officer makes up his mind based upon the information that's given at the scene. Now, very often, sometimes people are not always in condition to talk to an officer at the scene. Sometimes people are not unconscious, or they have very serious injuries, or maybe they've already been transported by the EMS to an emergency room before the police officer even gets a chance to talk to everybody. So remember that the police officer opinion is not the final word. And generally speaking, a police officer is not allowed to give his opinion in trial unless, of course, he is a certified accident reconstructionist and that he's taken the necessary investigatory steps at the scene, where they'll be taking measurements and photographs and this and that and the other, all kinds of stuff to lay the foundation. So very often, again, don't be intimidated per se by what the police officer opinion may have been at the scene. We ask people to simply take care of business, both in cooperating the scene as best they can, and then, of course, if you have any injuries that need to be addressed, certainly take care of yourself. You got to take care of number one there.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that word injury, because sometimes you're in an accident and you may not feel it right then. But suppose I feel hurt later. How do I handle that?
Well, the best thing to always do is to simply be honest about it. And sometimes clients call me and they say, should I go to the doctor? And I say, well, what would your mama tell you to do? And they say, well, my mama would tell me to go to the doctor. And I say, well, I think you should go. If you have any kind of injury that's causing you any type of discomfort, it's the best to at least get it documented. We don't wish any harm on anyone, just so they have a bigger case. We're never going to encourage people to go out and run up needless medical bills in a situation. That's not right either. But let your pain and your conscience be your guide. And then once you do have that initial evaluation with your truthful complaints, it's always best then to be compliant with what the doctors may prescribe, or what they may say, a treatment plan that they devise for your diagnosis. It's always a good idea to be a compliant patient, and just to simply be honest with the doctors and nurses or any medical care provider that you may see.
Okay, I've seen this situation. I'm riding in a car. I'm the passenger. We were in an accident, but I'm the passenger.
Right.
And the other person who's driving the car may not want to do what I want to do. What do we do there?
Oh, so you say your friend's driving, you're the passenger in the car, and it's his fault or her fault.
Right.
It's your friend's fault. Oh boy. Well, that's more of a social situation and a social decision you have to make. The fact of the matter is, in South Carolina, the passenger guest always has a case against their host driver, because we look at it as who is the negligent party and whose insurance company is going to be responsible for paying these bills. Liability insurance in South Carolina follows the car and not necessarily the individual. So if the car you're occupying is at fault or partially at fault, you still have the absolute right to make the claim against the drivers, against your friend's insurance company. You have to remember that too, that once the police officer comes to the scene, the police officer determines that your driver friend was partially at fault or completely at fault or a little bit at fault, or it may be, the comparative fault analysis. Then, you must remember that whatever's going to be reported to the insurance company is going to be reported, whether you make your claim or not. And the insurance companies, from that point on, make up their mind how they're going to handle the claim. But we understand the social situation they're involved. But from a legal standpoint, it really carries no weight.
Okay, we thank you, Attorney Price, for what we just talked about. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we want to talk about what people need to know, what they need to bring to the office when they're coming to file a claim. We'll talk about that and more right after this break.